Have you ever felt a quiet ache? Not pain, not sadness exactly, but a kind of longing you couldn't quite name. It might come late at night when the house is still and the light from the hallway softens everything around you. Or maybe it shows up during an old song, one that used to make you feel close to someone you once held dear. You don't talk about it, not even with friends, but it's there. A wish for connection, a need to be to be touched, to be held, not just in the arms of someone else, but in the awareness that you still matter. Let's begin with a simple truth. Intimacy is not just for the young, and more importantly, you don't outgrow the need to feel close. We live in a world that doesn't talk much about intimacy after a certain age. Somehow, the moment you turn 60, 70, 80, people stop imagining that you want love, warmth, closeness. The world gets quiet about it, like it's no longer polite to wonder about that part of your life. But let's be honest, has that longing really disappeared? Or has it just gone underground, buried beneath shame, ageist assumptions, or the belief that it's too late? Because it's not. You're not too late. You're not past your prime. You're not broken. You are still here. You are still human. And humans were made for connection. Let's talk about what intimacy really means. When most people hear the word intimacy, their mind immediately jumps to sex. And while physical intimacy can be part of it, it's not the whole story. Far from it. Intimacy is the feeling that you are close to someone and that closeness is safe. It's the touch of a hand on your shoulder, the way someone looks at you when you're sharing something tender. It's feeling emotionally satin. It's holding someone's hand, not out of obligation, but out of comfort. It's not always romantic. It's not always sexual. Sometimes it's just being able to cry in front of someone without apology, or laugh so hard you have to catch your breath, or sit in silence with someone and not feel alone. And that kind of intimacy is just as essential now as it was when you were 25. But here's where the mindset needs to shift. So many seniors have internalized the message that intimacy is something they shouldn't want anymore. That it's undignified, that it belongs to another chapter of life. Let's gently push back on that idea. Intimacy is not about age, it's about aliveness. And you, my friend, are still very much alive. Let me tell you about Florence. Florence is 82. She's sharp, funny, lives alone in a small cottage, and gardens every morning. She told me once, "I haven't had sex in 22 years, but I still crave intimacy." When I asked her what she meant, she smiled and said, "I miss being touched, not just romantically. I miss the way my husband used to rest his hand on my knee when we sat together. I miss being hugged every day. I miss someone brushing something from my cheek and calling me love. It's not about the bedroom, it's about being close." That stayed with me, because Florence isn't alone. So many older adults feel that same ache, but they don't know how to talk about it. Or worse, they feel shame for still wanting it. Let me say this clearly. There is no shame in wanting connection, wanting to feel loved, desired, seen. This is not vanity. This is vitality. So grab a cup of tea, settle in, and stay with me until the end. Because this conversation matters, and you deserve to hear it. Why does this even matter? What does intimacy have to do with health? More than you might think. Studies have shown that older adults who experience regular forms of intimacy, physical touch, emotional closeness, even affectionate conversation, tend to report lower levels of anxiety and depression, better immune system response, more restful sleep, improved cardiovascular health, and a deeper sense of life satisfaction. In other words, intimacy isn't just nice. It's necessary for the mind, for the body, for the spirit. And yet, so few talk about it, especially in senior communities, especially in families, especially among those who've gone years without that kind of contact. Let's pause here. What messages did you grow up with about aging and love? Did anyone ever tell you it was okay, beautiful even, to desire closeness in your later years? Probably not. That's why this conversation matters, because we're not just talking about romance. We're talking about dignity, about remembering that no matter your age, you still have a heart that wants to be held. But what if you don't have a partner? This is an important question, and one we'll explore more deeply in later parts. But for now, know this. Intimacy comes in many forms. Through friendships, through physical touch like massage or therapeutic bodywork, through deep conversations, warm hugs, shared rituals, even through the intimacy you cultivate with yourself. Yes, you heard that right. Self-connection, self-respect. Learning to inhabit your own body again, not as something that's failing you, but as something worthy of love, of care, of tenderness. We'll talk more soon about how to begin that process, how to open gently, how to explore without fear or shame. But for now, just let this truth rest inside you. My need for connection is not a weakness. It's a sign that I am still alive and still capable of giving and receiving love. Now that we've come this far, let's go even deeper. It's one thing to know that intimacy matters. It's another to believe that you are still allowed to experience it gently, fully, and on your terms. Many older adults have spent decades putting others first. Raising children, holding down jobs, caring for spouses or parents. By the time the world finally quiets down and there's space to breathe, a strange new question arises. Do I still deserve this kind of closeness? The answer is yes. Unequivocally, yes. But the path forward doesn't begin with action. It begins with permission. And that's what this part is all about. Giving yourself quiet permission to believe that intimacy, in all its forms, is still yours to explore. Now let's look at what it really means to get ready, not perfectly, but honestly. Let's expand what intimacy means. If you grew up in a time when intimacy was only talked about behind closed doors, or not at all, then redefining it might feel uncomfortable. But it can also be incredibly freeing. Intimacy is not a performance. It's not a goal to achieve, or something you have to earn by being younger, thinner, or partnered. Intimacy is a kind of presence, a way of being close to another person in body, mind, or spirit. There is physical intimacy, touch, closeness, skin-to-skin comfort. There is emotional intimacy, trust, honesty, feeling safe to be vulnerable. There is relational intimacy, companionship, friendship, shared experiences. And there is even spiritual intimacy, a shared sense of meaning, stillness, and belonging. Each of these forms is available to you right now, regardless of age, relationship status, or physical ability. Why don't we talk about this more often? Because we've been told not to, especially as we age. For women, the silence can come from being taught that their worth was tied to youth and desirability, and that once those fade, so does intimacy. For men, the pressure to perform can turn intimacy into anxiety, and when the body changes, so can self-worth. For everyone, budging can bring home grief, even fear when it comes to the body. But intimacy isn't about looking the part. It's about showing up, real, tender, human, and that means you don't have to feel perfect to begin. You just have to feel willing. Let me tell you about James. James is 74. He lost his wife 10 years ago and never remarried. He spends most of his time volunteering at a veterans center, playing guitar in the evenings, and walking his dog, Maggie. When we spoke about intimacy, he paused, then said, "I didn't think I missed it, until someone hugged me for no reason." He explained that a younger staff member at the center had wrapped her arms around him one morning, just in gratitude. "She didn't mean anything by it," he said, "but something cracked open in me. I went home and cried. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd been held." That moment changed everything for James. He didn't run out looking for romance, but he began asking for hugs. He began sitting closer to people. He began opening up more, letting others in. And in doing so, he began to heal something he didn't even know was broken. This is the power of gentle preparation. You don't have to make bold declarations. You don't have to announce to your friends, "I'm seeking intimacy." You just have to soften around the possibility that more is still available to you. Try this. Next time someone reaches out a hand, take it. Next time someone offers a compliment, don't brush it off, receive it. Next time you feel a longing for closeness, don't push it down, acknowledge it. Intimacy starts with noticing what you need and honoring it. But what if I've been alone a long time, or never felt comfortable with intimacy, even when I was younger? That's okay. Sometimes our early experiences with intimacy weren't safe, or they were tied up in shame, or we didn't grow up in families that modeled healthy affection. And sometimes the years have created protective walls, because life has handed us loss, betrayal, abandonment. You don't have to tear down those walls all at once. You just need to open a window, let in some air, let in the idea that connection can feel safe again. This might mean starting with self-intimacy. Touch your own hands gently. Look at yourself in the mirror and speak kindly. Place your hand over your heart and breathe into the tenderness that's still alive there. You don't need a partner to practice intimacy. You just need a willingness to connect, first with yourself, then with others. Here's a gentle question to carry with you. What kind of closeness do I want in this season of life? Maybe it's soft conversation. Maybe it's physical touch. Maybe it's spiritual companionship. Maybe it's laughter, storytelling, or sitting in silence together. There is no one right answer. But you deserve to ask the question, and you deserve to believe that closeness is still possible. Let's talk about fear and how to hold it gently. The fear of rejection, of judgment, of your body being too different, of not being desired. These are real fears. They don't disappear just because we grow older. In fact, sometimes they grow louder. But so does your courage. And courage now doesn't mean pushing through. It means honoring yourself enough to say, "This still matters to me," and beginning again, softly. So if all you do today is acknowledge that intimacy still lives inside of you, still whispers its longing, then that is more than enough. Because from that place, possibility begins. Let's keep going. What comes next might surprise you. There's a quiet kind of courage in reaching out for connection, especially after years of loneliness, or grief, or believing that part of your life was over. But something beautiful happens when we not only long for intimacy, but allow ourselves to live it again. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but gently, honestly, in the small moments where the heart opens just a little wider. Because intimacy isn't something you wait for, it's something you create with heart. Here's where things become real. Because this is what it looks like to live the change, not just think about it. Let's start with the ordinary, because intimacy often hides there. Many people think intimacy must be grand. Candlelight dinners, passionate romance, deep declarations. And yes, it can be those things. But more often, It lives in the everyday. A shared cup of tea, a kind hand on your back as you walk into a room, reading side by side in the quiet, laughing over a memory that only the two of you understand. Even folding laundry together can be intimate, if done with tenderness. One woman told me that every morning, her husband of 51 years rubs lotion on her hands. Her arthritis makes it hard to do herself. She calls it the most intimate part of my day. No words, just presence. That's what intimacy can look like now. Slower, softer, still sacred. You don't need a partner to practice intimacy. This is something we don't say enough. So many older adults live alone, widowed, divorced, or simply never partnered, and many assume that intimacy is no longer available to them. But that's not true. Yes, romantic intimacy is one path, but it's not the only one. Intimacy can bloom in friendship, in community, even within ourselves. Sharing a deep, honest conversation with a friend, allowing someone to see your tears without apology, volunteering your time and feeling useful and connected again, spending time with a grandchild and truly listening to their world. Even letting your dog curl beside you on the couch can be an act of mutual affection. These are not consolation prizes. They are real moments of connection, and they matter. Let me tell you about Miriam. Miriam is 69. She never married and spent most of her life as a caregiver for her mother, then her younger brother. After both passed, she found herself completely alone for the first time. She joined a neighborhood walking group, not because she loved walking, but because she missed conversation. On her third outing, a woman named Elise asked if Miriam would like to get coffee afterward. They sat on a park bench for over an hour, talking about everything from music to menopause. Miriam says, "I hadn't felt that seen in years. We didn't talk about anything dramatic, but I felt known." Now they walk together every week. They've become each other's chosen family, and neither of them is romantically involved. But the intimacy they've created? It's healing. It's sustaining. It's real. Sometimes, intimacy begins by letting someone in, even just a little. Not everyone finds this easy. Maybe your trust has been broken. Maybe you've been dismissed too many times. Maybe you've simply gotten used to being invisible. But you don't have to swing open the doors. Just unlock them. Just make space for a small gesture. A longer hug. A deeper, "How are you?" A willingness to say, "I miss you." Every act of intimacy, no matter how small, says, "I am here. You matter, and I want to be close." What if you're already in a relationship, but intimacy has faded? This is more common than people admit. Over time, couples often fall into routine. Intimacy becomes background noise, or worse, a source of frustration. But it doesn't have to stay that way. You can rebuild closeness, slowly, gently, without pressure. Start with physical touch that asks nothing in return. A hand on the arm, a kiss on the cheek, sitting close on the sofa. Start with curiosity. Ask a question you've never asked, even after decades. Start with presence. Put down the phone, turn off the TV, and simply be with each other. Intimacy doesn't require sparks. It requires willingness, attention, time. Here's a simple practice to try. Sit with someone you trust. Could be a partner, a friend, a family member. Set a timer for 3 minutes. Take turns answering this question. What's something you miss about feeling close to someone? No advice, no interruption, just listening. You'd be surprised how much healing happens, not from fixing anything, but from feeling heard. And for those who feel most disconnected, start with the mirror. I don't mean in a vanity way. I mean really look. Look at your face, your body, your hands. Touch your own skin and say, you're still worthy of care. Sit in silence and breathe into your heart until you can feel it again. Intimacy begins with presence, with softness, with saying to yourself, "You matter to me." From that place, every other kind of closeness becomes possible. You don't need to get back to the intimacy you once had. You get to create the kind you need now. And maybe it looks different. Maybe it's slower. Maybe it's quieter. But it can be richer, more honest, more nourishing. Because you've lived long enough to know that connection isn't about drama. It's about being known and being safe in that knowing. So take one step today. Call someone. Sit closer. Say how you feel. Ask for a hug. Offer your presence. Because intimacy isn't about waiting. It's about living with heart. Let's keep going. What comes next might be the most healing truth of all. At this stage in life, we've lived enough to know that the things that look small from the outside can carry the most meaning. A gentle hand on your back, a long silence with someone who doesn't rush to fill it, a shared memory that makes you both smile, even if no words are spoken. These aren't just tender moments. They're proof that intimacy, in its truest form, is never about youth. It's about presence. And perhaps now, more than ever, you're in a position to understand what intimacy really means, not just as a feeling, but as a form of truth. Now, we're not just moving. We're transforming the way we see ourselves in this season of life. What if intimacy in aging is not a loss, but a return? So much of the messaging around aging is framed in terms of what's no longer possible. But what if we asked a different question? What if intimacy in this chapter of life isn't about doing more, but about being more? More honest, more available, more tender with ourselves and others. You're not reaching back to recover something lost. You're arriving in a place of emotional clarity that many people never get to. And that's a sacred place. You don't have to chase intensity anymore. You're allowed to seek depth. Let's talk about memory, not for nostalgia, but for insight. For many seniors, memories bring a mix of warmth and ache, a touch that's now gone, a partner who no longer sits beside you, or maybe memories of intimacy that were once confusing, painful, or incomplete. But when we bring mindfulness to memory, something profound happens. We stop trying to rewrite the past and instead begin to witness it, not to judge, but to understand. Maybe you realize that moments you dismissed were actually acts of love. Maybe you see that a part of you was always seeking closeness, even when you didn't know how to name it. Maybe you grieve the time lost in fear or shame, and in that grief, find forgiveness for yourself. And that forgiveness, that's intimacy too. Grief and intimacy often walk hand in hand. By now, you've likely lost someone whose presence once filled the space where connection lived. A spouse, a friend, a sibling, a partner in life or love. And when they leave, it can feel like that part of you leaves too, but what if we honored grief as a mirror of love, not the end of it? Grief, in its own way, is an intimate emotion. It reminds us that we loved deeply, that our hearts were open, that we were connected, and even now, especially now, that part of your heart is still capable of loving, still capable of receiving. No, it won't be the same. It doesn't have to be. But your capacity to feel has not faded. It has ripened. Let's redefine intimacy as spiritual connection, not religious, but sacred. You don't need a partner to feel held. Sometimes, intimacy is the way sunlight warms your skin while you sit by the window with your tea, or the way your body exhales when you hear the sound of your favorite song, or the feeling of oneness you get when holding the hand of someone in pain, saying nothing, but being fully with them. There is an intimacy in presence, in attentiveness, in gratitude. When you say, "This moment matters," you are practicing sacred intimacy with life itself. And at this stage of life, maybe that's the most powerful relationship of all. You are not past your capacity for love. You're standing inside of it. Intimacy now may be quieter, but it can be more meaningful. Because now, you don't have anything to prove. You don't need to perform. You've lived enough to know that real closeness isn't always about touch. It's about trust. You trust that the person beside you can hold space for you as you are. You trust yourself enough to show up in your vulnerability. You trust the moment enough to be still within it. That kind of intimacy doesn't require permission. It requires presence. And the more you cultivate presence, the more connection you feel, not just with others, but with yourself. Here's the truth that changes everything. You are still worthy of being known. Not for who you used to be, not for who others expected you to be, but for who you are now, in this body, in this season, in this unfolding version of you. Even if you've been hurt, even if you've been alone, even if your body has changed, or your confidence has waned, or you no longer know where to begin, you are still worthy of being held, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, soulfully. And that worth is not earned. It's innate. So let's reframe this journey, not as a winding down, but as a turning inward. You are not becoming less. You are becoming more aware. You are not out of time. You are arriving right on time. You are not beyond connection. You are closer than ever to understanding what connection really means. And in that understanding, there is peace. There is power. There is the deep, gentle freedom of knowing that you are enough. So breathe into that truth. Let it settle in your chest. Let it soften something in you, because what comes next might be the most important part of all. So here we are, at the edge of something tender, something true. After all the stories, all the questions, all the quiet shifts of heart, this is where we pause and breathe. You've made it to this moment. That means something. It means you cared enough about your well-being to explore this topic. It means you've been willing to sit with discomfort, to reflect, to stay open. That alone is an act of courage. And now, at the close of this conversation, I want to offer you something many seniors rarely hear. You are still worthy of love, of closeness, of being chosen, not in spite of your age, but because of your depth. Let this part of your life be more than survival. Let it be intimacy, reimagined. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not done. Those messages may have found their way into your thinking, but they don't belong to you. The world often stops asking about your needs once you pass a certain age. But that doesn't mean those needs disappear. And it certainly doesn't mean you're selfish for still having them. You still want to be held, to be heard, to feel beautiful, to feel close. Not because you're clinging to youth, but because you're human. And your humanity didn't retire when your hair turned silver. It matured. It deepened. It's more honest now, less about performance, more about truth. The body may change, but the heart still reaches. You may move more slowly. You may carry grief in your bones. You may have scars inside and out, but you're still here. And as long as you're here, you deserve to be loved, held, seen, not as a memory of who you were, but as the beautiful embodiment of who you've become. Intimacy at this stage of life isn't about chasing excitement. It's about choosing connection, slow and gentle, real. You don't need a partner to feel intimate. You need presence. Intimacy begins with how you treat yourself. Do you speak to yourself kindly? Do you honor your body instead of criticizing it? Do you reach out when you need support? Do you let yourself be touched? By music, by sunlight, by memory, by others. This is where intimacy starts, in your willingness to be with life, fully. So whether you're partnered or single, surrounded or alone, the invitation remains the same. Come home to yourself first. From there, all other connections flow. You are allowed to desire, allowed to feel, allowed to ask. Ask for a hand to hold, ask to sit closer, ask for time, for tenderness, for care. You've earned it, not because you've lived long enough, but because you were born worthy of it in the first place. Somewhere along the way, maybe you forgot that, or the world told you to forget. But it's not too late to remember. It's not too late to begin again. Let this next season be defined not by what's missing, but by what's still possible. Possible to love again, possible to feel joy in your own skin, possible to explore new forms of closeness, emotionally, spiritually, sensually, possible to say, I want to feel alive again, and mean it because you can. And the beauty of intimacy at this age? It doesn't rush. It doesn't push. It doesn't pretend. It meets you exactly where you are and says, you're enough. Here's your gentle invitation. Light a candle tonight, not for romance, but for remembrance, not for who you were, but for who you are still becoming. Let that candle be a symbol of your softness, your longing, your courage. Let it remind you that connection is still available and always will be. And if this conversation stirred something in you, if it helped you feel less alone, more seen, know this. You are part of a quiet, powerful movement of seniors reclaiming intimacy as a rightful, joyful part of aging. You are not the exception. You are the example. And now, a final blessing. Place your hand gently on your chest. Close your eyes if you wish. Breathe in and out. And repeat after me, silently or aloud. I am still here. I am still becoming. I am still worthy of closeness, of comfort, of love. Whatever age you are, whatever a road you've taken to get here, you are not done. You are still unfolding. And that, dear friend, is the most beautiful part.